But we're going to be doing a quick transition because we're actually going to be having a fireside chat, after which we'll be having our break. So I know we're going to bring some chairs on this stage, and I'm going to be calling some folks on the stage to join me for our first fireside chat, just to react to the data and to get an opportunity to hear some folks who are experts in the space, to just do some informal reflection with you all. So give us a moment, we're setting it up, and we'll move forward. So once again, I just want to reintroduce our special guests. So we have again Karen Pittman. Just to reintroduce you one more time, you're a partner at KP Catalyst, and we have with us as well Mr. Michael Nettles, Sr., who is the Vice President at ETS, which is the Policy Evaluation and Research Center. So as we were beginning, got cut off, we were going to begin with some opening remarks, so please, by all means.
And you can hear me now, yes. Okay, I don't have to ask that question. So Truth in Advertising, I was a part of the research group that DACSTEF put together, so I had an advance warning of what some of the findings were. But it's just really important to have this conversation and to start from the right place. So what I want to do is just start by reading you something from Pike County, Georgia, public schools. I don't know Pike County, Georgia public schools. I haven't been to Pike County, but I just wanted to Google a portrait of a graduate, which is a movement that's going around the country to engage communities in saying, what do you want your graduates to look like? Because we can't assess what we can't aspire to. We don't know what we want our graduates to look like. We're going to get caught immediately in the old ways of doing things. So this is the first one that popped up. So Pike County wants their children to be able to think critically, solve creatively, communicate clearly, act responsibly, and collaborate effectively. And then there are rubrics under each of those 5 goals. And those rubrics tell you what it looks like to do those things. And those rubrics then connected back to the state standards. So it's possible to go from what feels like a very fragmented, distant set of standards that we have for kids that they can't relate to a simple set of goals that young people, their families, their communities can see themselves in. And when we do this, what we immediately get to is the fact that those goals are not just owned by schools. Those goals are owned by the community, and those goals increasingly are being executed in community organizations. Youth development organizations, civil rights organizations, social justice organizations, recreation organizations, libraries, museums. Everybody in the community can pay attention to those goals. The other way that I say this is we have this huge debate in the country, as you know, about SEL, social emotional learning. We're stuck on an acronym. How many of you have eaten Girl Scout cookies? If you look on the box of Girl Scout cookies, they describe to you in great detail the competencies that those young women are gaining by selling cookies and what they're going to do with that. I've never seen anybody throw out their Girl Scout cookies or complain about the box. But we have people in this country who are going after SEL because it is an acronym, because we've moved the definition too far away from the people. Learning Heroes, a couple of years ago, did a survey supported by the Wallace Foundation. They've done a couple surveys, actually. One survey just asked parents, what language do you use to describe your goals for your kids? And what they did magically was lump it all together. We have SEED and SEAL, and we talk about social, emotional, and academic competence. They lumped it all together into a specific set of words, like you just heard in these goals. I want my young person to be ethical. I want them to be a good problem solver. I want them to be creative. I want them to have good time management. I want them certainly to read and write and do math and be literate. All those things are blended together. So if we're going to have a future of assessment, we have to start it by having a future of setting goals that don't artificially distinguish academics from everything else.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Dax and Karen, for your remarks. This is a really tremendous effort by the National Urban League. And I want to begin by saying that I appreciate the study that was conducted, the methodology is great. And one of the things that at ETS we think needs to happen more often is that we need to be able to engage with people about assessment. So very often, the public engagement in assessment is done through local school boards every now and then, but it's also discussed along with school lunch and bus rides and everything else. This is a focus on the issue that I think we need to address more often, and we also need more people to engage on a regular basis. By that I mean work at ETS to produce the assessments. The assessments reflect very often the people who are thinking and writing the assessments. And we need more diversity. We need more involvement by a broader cross-section of people writing the test, thinking about, the representation that needs to be reflected in the assessment. That explains some of what I think we're seeing in the results, especially on the issues of bias, which is one that has occurred. We've had that issue forever in this country, and it's a legitimate claim. It's a legitimate, criticism of standardized large-scale tests. But the way to change that is to get more engagement, more involvement in thinking about it. So if you were sitting writing an assessment about mathematics and thinking about the children who were going to take it, you would do it possibly from your perspective, your understanding and knowledge about the schools they attend, the neighborhoods they live in. And so what we get in the assessment is very often, exactly that from people who are not as well represented as we need to be. I think for me, we've addressed this issue many times in the past. Edmund W. Gordon, I'm the Edmund W. Gordon Chair at ETS. So I've spent my career doing research. And while Dax actually introduced me as Michael Nettles Sr., and then he said Vice President for ETS, I assure you there's only one Michael Nettles, that is me, and I push back more frequently these days when referred to as senior, unless it's in my title. But at ETS, we've had the Future of Assessment, chaired by Edmund W. Gordon, who many of you know. There's a report on the ETS website. But even that report did not address the equity issues the way they are being addressed by UNIDOS and the National Urban League. So I'd like to applaud that. Now, when we have a forum like this and I'm invited to participate, or anybody in my organization is invited to participate, it's a signal. Thank you. It's a signal that we are invited to the table. I've always felt that way, that we actually have something to contribute. In my research over the years, I have lots of stories to add to the stories that are going to be in the report, in the forthcoming report. One in particular was at Bank Street College of Education when Stephanie Bell Rose sponsored High Potential Youth when she was president of Goldman Sachs Foundation. There was a school in the Bronx where Bank Street was recruiting students for a summer program to prepare them for selective colleges and universities. And very often part of the selection process involved asking the teachers to identify their leading students or most promising students. And very often the teacher would identify a handful of students who then would get looked at by the selection team. And along came the standardized test, and very often the two didn't agree. And my observation over time was that teachers were very often leaving off students who did illustrate promise on the assessment, that, because of a variety of things. Maybe the student was an introvert. Maybe the student lacked the social skills. Maybe the student really was a difficult student. But on the assessment, they demonstrated that they had a high capacity for high achievement. And so they would be selected because of that. And so, and very often we look at grades and they would reflect also some bias. Grades are highly correlated with success, but they very often are biased. So my conclusion over time has been we need all of them, all of that evidence to make decisions to help us to not just select, but to intervene to address learning issues. One of the challenges that we have is the resources that we have for addressing the needs of every child, don't always exist, and so we have to also worry about that. Now, what I think we've been led to through the study that is being conducted here, and we await the publication and release of the ultimate report, and then we will really respond. I think it's really incumbent upon places like ETS to respond. We've responded to the UC system's decision, for example, not to include a standardized test in the admissions process by thinking about what they are asking for. They have 13 criteria, none of which is a test. But they are, if you look at the 13 criteria, 2 through 12, require students to write. Students are going to have to tell their story. They're going to have to think and write about the context that they've been living in. They're going to have to write about their learning journey. They're going to have to talk about how they learn, what they like to learn. Those are going to be really important kind of standards that will get reviewed in the review process. So one of the things that we're doing at ETS is to think about learning how to help students write. Okay, so, and we're calling this project, we're doing it with the National Writing Project, and we're calling it Writing Future Me. And we're gonna start with ninth graders to talk, to set up a curriculum to help students learn how to curate their learning. Another thing that is happening that is really promising, I think, is the use of technology and AI in technology to contribute to formative assessment, helping to integrate learning and assessment. I think Dax has given me the, are you?
No, never though.
Okay.
It wouldn't be.
When you lean forward like that, I observed.
No, I mean, listen, you have so much knowledge to offer us, and I think there's going to be an opportunity for this app for the audience to react to that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to also give Karen an opportunity to react to some of what you're sharing as well. I think you offered a lot of insight around how your work is being responsive to the moment, how there is a continuing opportunity for assessments to play a complementary or even a significant role alongside other means of standardized assessments, I should say, alongside other means of assessing student knowledge and learning. And I wanted to bring you in both to react to like that as a sort of like that being brought into the room. And I'm also interested in how, maybe these aren't totally connected, but I want to bring it in anyway, how you feel like the OST world and work that you have done, I've done, others in this room have done, can help be also uplifted and integrated into the future of assessments in a more formal way. So both reacting to that and also thinking about the work you've done and how that could be.
Right, and I'll see if I can tie those two together.
I know.
So first, again, just because I'm old and I've done a lot of things, I'll tell you that I was first met Mike when I was on the ETS board about 20 years ago. And that says something, because I'm not against standardized tests. I think they have a place. I think they have a role in a balanced portfolio. And we can address the bias and other things, but the over-reliance on standardized tests is what's killing us, not the fact that we have standardized ways to assess competence in various areas. One of the things that I liked about being on the ETS board is everybody knows ETS for SAT, but I got there and you do lots of competency tests for nurses, for professionals. You have a whole range of tests that are not controversial because they are linked to competencies that are directly linked to real life skill and the workforce. And so I just want us to start by saying, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's a lot of ways that we do assessment. Linda Darling-Hammond talks about assessment for learning. Let me get in there and find out what you know so that I can appropriately guide your learning journey. Assessment as learning. Let me make sure that as I'm giving you feedback, I'm giving it to you in a way that you understand assessment helps you grow. And then finally, assessment of learning. At the end of the day, did you learn enough? But we don't know enough if we don't know for what. So putting this in the context of not just different ways to do tests, but also really understanding the role of tests, the role of assessments broadly defined, authentic assessments, portfolio assessments, et cetera, is really important. But all of it has to be grounded, again, in what it is that we want young people to be able to do. And that's much easier to talk about in terms of a set of competencies rather than abstract levels of knowledge. Why that's important and why that's been such a starting place for folks in community programs, youth development, out of school time, whatever you want to call it, is we're not in charge of academic competence. We're not the people who have been charged with moving kids to a certain point, whether it's in terms of course credits, it's in terms of test scores, in terms of knowledge proficiency. Those things are important to have. Those fundamental literacies and those foundational knowledges are important to have. But in the out-of-school space, in the community space, we actually get the privilege of finding out where young people are and moving them forward in interest-driven electives. That can happen in school as well. But when you start with what a young person is interested in, you make it challenging enough and rigorous enough that they need to bring their skills up in order to perform it. And doing well in it is meaningful to them. It's much easier to teach. And it's teaching in an integrated way. So it also lets us put the focus back on the quality of the engagement, the quality of the experiences being created for young people to participate in. So the thing that I always find is interesting and disturbing, and I'll say disturbing, about the challenge of getting public education in this country, public schools in particular, from where they are in assessment and accountability to where they need to be to really understand and deeply embed the science of learning and development that we now know so well, is that schools have started on the opposite end of a theory of action. And I'll be quick about this. Because youth organizations engage young people voluntarily, they have to be concerned about quality. Quality defined as not just content, which varies a lot, but context. They have to immediately create a context in which young people feel safe, they feel that they belong, they feel that they can learn, they feel that they can grow, they feel that they can make friends. If they don't get that right, young people won't come back. You can't teach kids if they're not there. They're required to be in school. They're not required to be in youth organizations. So that fact that we have to start with a quality context in order to get them there, then we have to build in the content in relevant enough ways to get them really engaged. When you do that, you then get to a lot of growth in a lot of skill areas integrated together. Like I just read with the Pike County format. That language that I just read in Pike County, youth organizations have been using that language for 100 years. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We talk about young people in terms of a broad set of competencies that they should be developing, and then we create activities and supports for them to do that, and on their own level with a multi-age group, et cetera. And then finally, if young people have really built those skills, practiced those skills, and named them so they know what they have, they can transfer those skills into other areas. They can transfer them into school. They can transfer them into work. So we call that the Quest model. Quality gets you engagement, gets you skill growth, gets you transfer to other outcome areas. Schools start with a required set of outcomes. It's too narrow, and we measure them too narrowly. And then because we start in that narrow place, you can't get backwards. You can't go backwards across that theory of action. Everything has been constrained by the way we've defined it. So this is a critically important discussion to have, but we need to broaden it to understand if we don't give communities and young people, especially communities and young people of color, the opportunity to really define what they want to be in a way that makes sense to them, and then define what it looks like in a way that we can put rubrics behind it, then we can get to how do we assess, how do we know if this is happening? That way we will get to a balance. Then we have the technology and everything else to connect these things across systems, across the school system and the out-of-school system. There's no reason why we can't have young people getting credit for what they're doing in both places. Or learning at home during the pandemic. All these things can happen if we shift to a competency-based model and we understand what science tells us, which is learning happens everywhere and growth is driven by relationships and context.
Thank you. So to continue, thank you, yes. Absolutely. So one of the things that I'm hearing from you, you've talked a lot about broadening perhaps the identity of the people who are participating in the assessment creation. You're talking about broadening it in a bit of a different way, which is broadening what we are actually trying to, what we're measuring, how we're measuring. I'm curious about like how, what's being lifted up by Karen here in terms of a broader array of competencies, or at least moving and shifting towards a competency-based model that can be adequately assessed. To what extent do you find that your field is or engaged in that conversation, and what kind of strides are being made to at least sort of address what's being lifted up there?
Right. There are many things that I like about the work that you all have been doing on the study and the report that's forthcoming. What I would say is that as we look at what exists, and listening to Karen's remarks, also think about now what's possible. What is it that we want to invent for the future of assessment? I'll use two examples. One is a project that we're calling, and it's brand new, it's called Axol Learns. And we're doing it with a company called Territorium, which is in Mexico. Rebecca's here from Territorium. And also Soapbox Labs, which is in Ireland. And what Soapbox Lab has done is to invent, and they focus completely on voice recognition and interpretation for young children. Now, not even Siri and Alexa, as you know, have mastered that. This would be for children under the age of 12. And so what we're doing is now constructing an assessment for people when they enter kindergarten. We're going to ask them what they know about mathematics. We're going to ask them the math that they know. Prior to now, they couldn't tell us because they can't write most often. And they are providing it directly to people who sometimes they trust, sometimes they don't. And they don't know how much they have to provide. So we have a lot to learn, but the fact that we're focusing on oral representation of knowledge is potentially breakthrough. We don't have to use it just at that level, can use it more broadly. And, we're calling that Project Axol Learns. Axol is an aqua salamander, and we've identified it working with Territorium because we think children will relate to it. Another end of the spectrum, Karen talks about assessment for, practical use and skills. This is an era of credentialing. Credentialing has grown enormously just since Credential Engine has been documenting it in higher education since 2017. Almost 1 million different credentials now. So we're working with a company in the UK called Vitae. It's a public charity. And what they've been doing is taking a look at graduate education. What we've observed is that more people want to go to graduate school, want to work toward PhD degrees, and very often finding themselves underprepared for it. And what Vitae has done is identify 63 skills and attributes that people who are studying in graduate school should possess. And what we want to do is work with Vitae to develop those for both learning and assessment and possibly credentialing. So that would be two ways. Now, to your question about the involvement of people, I can tell you we're working on a project now with a company called Area 9 Lyceum. It's a Danish company. It has an AI platform called Rhapsode. And Rhapsode is reputed to be the best learning AI system platform in the world. And when I ask the people at Area 9 to prove it, they always give me some evidence. And I'm always asking just to make sure. But they like the fact that we can work with them to produce content for learning and assessment. And it's a learning platform, but we think that adding the assessment component to it improves it. They tell us that we produce assessments that are much better than they would to go to market. So we are working together with them, and I can tell you, we make decisions every week, and being at the table, I have an influence over the decisions that get made. Things like who participates in pilot studies. Very often people don't think about the variety of the population.
Well, that makes me think about, like, there's obviously this emerging concern that people have around AI and embedded bias therein. And so I guess the question, one of those would be, like, how is that AI that's being developed in some ways possibly addressing the potentiality for bias? And then secondarily, when you presented the opportunity that's happening with kindergarten students, is there a way in which you all are thinking about how that doesn't become used as a bludgeon, as a tool for tracking, so that a student who's not able to do X is automatically placed here? Is there some thinking that you all are integrating around those things?
Yeah, so I'm probably going to say something that my colleagues would say you shouldn't have said that, but to your last point about Axol, we're working in Broward County Public Schools with the Broward County Public School District. It's the 6th largest school district in the country. It has a really diverse population, as you know, multiple languages, which is also important. Thinking about assessing people in their native language. Also thinking about there are 142 elementary schools in that district. Thinking about the stratification of the district by social class, by ethnicity, and so on. Selecting bits of places from each segment of the population, trying to cover the representation rather than thinking that we can, go to one place and produce an instrument. And that's happened historically. Mm-hmm. So those kind of decisions are really important. And having people at the table, we've talked to people who say things like, I've worked in a kindergarten, and I asked the students the first day, to tell me their names. And the variety of responses people get to that basic question. If you convey that to somebody who's developing standardized tests, you might not believe it. Some people encountering students who can't tell them their name on the first day of school. Mm-hmm. So, it's just really important to think about who's involved.
I want to track from a team. I saw a wrap-up message, but I also want to believe that there's some question and answer time, because I know that there's probably some questions in this room that we would present to these two amazing panelists. So I think we wanted to create and open up just a little bit of time for some Q&A. So this is that opportunity. There is the mic, and we also want to invite folks from the live stream, if there's some questions that you have that are coming through, to bring those into the space as well. So let's get to it for a few minutes, if you will. Any questions that are coming up that you want to position? And I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind. Thank you so much, sir. And please say your name. Let us know anything about you that might be important as you ask your question.
My name is Pedro Scotto. I'm from Portland, Oregon, Urban League of Portland. More of a comment. So I'm the youth manager and the AI. I think it's awesome. We're embarking on a program with AI right now. And your comment about concerns about ethics and what it could be used to be done, we see that. I have family that live in the UK, and the cameras that they have with the recognition for people's information that gets placed in. So as you're in the system and you're seen as a fan who's a problematic person, then if you go places, it recognizes you. So it could be used that way. And then in our community, that's something that people generally have a concern about because we've been disenfranchised and treated poorly. But it's an exciting tool that can be used. And in the work that I'm doing, I'm going through a program right now, 5 weeks. Today is the final process of getting a certification and using that for students after school, right? So in Portland, we have a couple of contracts with Portland Public Schools where they said they're not culturally competent to help our kids. My thing is, I think we need to have more of us in the spaces where our kids need to learn and having them see people who look like themselves, because that promotes learning. That's my belief. And then the mainstream needs to hire more people that are black and brown. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and when I was in school, when I saw people who looked like me and cared about what I thought, I performed better in school. And so I'm glad to be in the space sharing this time with folks. And it's exciting that we're having the discussion, but I also want to know, like, what are we going to do with the information in the larger society? You know, like, how will we provide this information to the people who need it so they can help the youth?
Thank you. I think there's always the question, and I think that's a question that we're already really deeply considering. So I don't want to, jump the gun by saying that we have the answer to that question, but I think the intention right now is to make sure that all the information is distilled broadly and it's shared in ways that are going to allow for folks to be able to react, not just in this room. So this is a starting point for that. So thank you for your comment, and thank you for asking that question and holding us accountable to making sure that that continues to be sort of lived through. Question?
Yeah, thank you so much. And this is incredible. I mean, we couldn't ask for better speakers or an event that's more timely in this country. So my question is very specifically about the integration of mentors into this process. I just feel like there are people out there that can help facilitate the testing needs that we have and really help individuals understand how to leverage the testing instruments to move through systems or to codify the instruments and to look at their own competencies. So I'm curious how you see mentors playing a part in this.
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge that the National Partnership for Student Success was just kicked off about 2 months ago by the White House. And that's a partnership specifically to increase by 250,000 the number of people in communities who are trained into what are called high-quality people-powered supports. Mentors are first of that. Mentors, tutors, success coaches, wraparound services coordinators, post-secondary success pathway coordinators. These are the people who have been named with research behind them that says if young people have these people in their lives, they are more likely to succeed academically, they're more likely to succeed vocationally, they're more likely to get to the end of whatever the journey is that they want to get to. So that's an important piece to say. I say that because mentors are critically important, but it's equally important for us to understand that each of those specified roles that I said, while slightly different, they all have the fundamental bottom line that they're relationship driven. If you don't have relationships with young people, nothing else is going to happen. So specifically in terms of mentoring young people around test anxiety, mentoring young people around best college pathways, mentoring young people around where they want to go, how they want to connect their school curricula to their after-school curricula, helping them find other interest-driven opportunities. Mentors can do all of that. Youth workers can do all that in the context of youth programs. One of the things that's important for us to do is to name roles, name the kinds of people who are in young people's lives, not by happenstance, but because they are there. They want to be there, they're paid to be there, or they're volunteering to be there, and they're there regularly. Name them. I'll say to the earlier person's comment, we have to name the other people in schools as well. We certainly need to diversify the teacher pipeline, but half the people in schools are not teachers. And those people are people of color. And they're disrespected because they're not in the academic classroom, but they have relationships, they have experiences, and they can be a part of the learning equation as well.
And if I might add, thank you for your question. Your question reminds me of three things. One is the classic definition of assessment, which was to sit beside. The imagery you get is a teacher or a student sitting together, learning and ensuring that learning is taking place. The second thing is the algebra project, or the Young People's Project, Maisha Moses' initiative with math literacy workers. And the third thing is Marian Wright Edelman and the Children's Defense Fund's Freedom Schools. In each case, it represents examples that we can use about the importance of engaging mentors and people on a regular basis, both not just in assessment, but also in learning.
I think it was, I was given the wrap up. Was it one question left? There was one more question, so please, who had that last question? Thank you.
It's a little high, sorry. Hi, my name is Adia Turner. I'm a new program manager at the National Urban League in the Education and Youth Department. Up until about a month ago, I was a middle school public education teacher. I taught 7th grade English. And when I'm listening to this conversation around assessments, I think there's a huge connection to content. So how are we driving assessments that are based on student profiles or a portrait of a graduate if the content itself doesn't also connect to that? Because I know a constant question that I had in my years of teaching was, yeah, my student can read this passage, but are they empathetic enough to understand a different perspective? Do they have the wherewithal to critically think on their own, especially with all technology and social media that is taking place? So I hope I'm making sense, but how do we craft and create these assessments that are driven on larger ideals of learning if the content that I'm required to teach in a classroom does not reflect the same thing?
That's a huge question, and my only answer is we just have to get angry and change it, because you can't do it, or only the extremely skilled teacher can do that. Can get you to the place where you've got content prescribed to be doled out in a certain amount of time, in a certain amount of courses or curricula, to an age group or an age-specific group of young people whose skills may be varied, and experiences may be varied, and you're really not allowed in that content that is delivered to you, you're not allowed to really get to know them and get them to the end point, but get them there in a way that is more responsive. Doing that, juggling that balance between can I cover all the things I'm supposed to cover while making this meaningful is hard. It's almost impossible. It's why when there's been studies done of teachers to look at how they're dealing with content, there's a study done recently, I'll get you the specifics on it. They found that about 40% of teachers lead with relationships, right? They found that another 30 to 40% lead with instruction. only about 20% do both. And in that 20% that do both, only 6% were able to get you to the highest level of instruction while still maintaining the relationships that had young people engaged. So it seems like we're pitting engagement against learning. But that's only because of how we set up the system. We know that engagement drives learning unless you put a system in place in which learning has been so decoded, what's the word I'm thinking of? It's been broken down into such tiny pieces that are meaningless.
Atomized.
Atomized, thank you, good word. Learning has been so atomized and abstracted that it doesn't engage and it's not leading to meaning. So I applaud you being in the classroom. I applaud you coming out of the classroom to go into a more flexible learning environment. But I don't think we can solve the problem without tackling it head on. And I think if we do the simple thing of doing these portraits of a learner, portraits of a graduate, getting to the point where people are saying real competencies that they want your people to have, the next step is to ask, where did you learn that? Where did you learn it as an adult? Where do you think your kid is learning it? Because you're going to find they're not learning it in school. Maybe they're learning it in school, they're not learning it in the classroom. And that's not because our teachers don't care. It's not because they can't do it. It's because of the constraints on the system.
Yeah. I hear commentary from a continuum from teachers teaching subject matter that is not reflected on the test, all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum, where teachers feel so restricted that every day they have a menu to follow, and it is aligned with the assessment because the two are designed together. One initiative that the National Urban League engaged in with the 95 affiliates, and there may be more now, was to engage with the local school board and getting more people in the community involved with the school board. Because what very often gets assessed begins with the RFP, the request for proposals that are generated by state boards of education. I think you really have to begin to think about that as one of the sources of the challenge that we face, and that is the assessment companies are very much competing for the business of those school districts or anybody else, the military, anybody else that needs assessments. And the specifications that come out and the requirements from those places are really important to affect.
I think it's an amazing point to end on. Kind of goes back to what we talked about, where accountability lives across the system and where we can begin to start to drive the work that we need to do in the advocacy space. I want to thank both of you for just taking the time to be here with us today, for sharing your wisdom. There's a lot of knowledge that was dropped between the two of you over the last half an hour. So please just give it up for everyone. Give it up for these two amazing people.